Anyone ever found a body? What's that like? I used to work at this sports bar, so it wasn't uncommon for people to leave their car in parking lot for a day or two. After having a couple days off, I come into work and this car that was there a day before my weekend started is still parked in the same spot. I tell me boss about it and go check it out. As I get close to the car, the smell hits me like a truck. Some guy committed suicide in his car during a heatwave in the middle of summer. I call the cops and tell my boss. When the police arrived, I was asked to make a statement. While I was doing this, the paramedics showed up to remove the body. They got this bloated, rotten corpse halfway out of the vehicle when it just fell apart, splattering on the pavement. I'll never forget that fucking smell. In November of 2004, I had a very best friend who lived 3 blocks from me. We were both managers of the same restaurant, but I had recently graduated from college and had started my career path, but still worked with him on weekends and school vacations. One freezing cold Monday night, the restaurant called saying he hadn't shown up for work. I had a key, so my roommate and I walked over. Upon entering his apartment, he was dead on the couch after taking more than 1 bottle of Ambien and a handle of vodka. I don't remember all the details of what I remember from the scene or what it looked like. I'm paying a lot of money in therapy to forget. We found a body washed up in the rocks on the beach. I was taking photos of vultures because they were sitting on the rocks and they were pretty large. I first saw his distended stomach and followed it down to his foot. I grabbed my husband and said, "That's a body." "Is that a body?" "Oh my gosh, that's a body." After double checking, we walked away to call 911. Checking a third time, from a different angle, I saw some of his skull missing and the unmistakable human hand. Somehow, we were able to get cell service long enough to tell the 911 dispatcher which state park we were in. Ambulance, firefighters, state police, a Coast Guard helicopter, truck and boat all showed up. It was amazing to watch. They carried him up in a body bag, placed him on the asphalt, and left him there for 30 minutes. It was just another day to first responders. Oddly, we are thankful to have found him because he was on part of the beach no one ever crosses the river to get to. The tide was coming in when he was pulled out. Had we not found him, when we found him, the crabs and vultures would have finished him off. His family would have never had answers. I don't know his name or anything other than what we witnessed. We are fine. Our trauma of finding a body is nothing compared to what his family would have endured, never knowing what happened to him. My granddad was a few months shy of 90 and still lived by himself. He was pretty spry. My mom called him every morning. One day he didn't answer, so she called me to go over and check on him. They lived about 40 minutes away, and I lived about 5 minutes away. I let myself in and found him in his easy chair holding his phone. He was cold. My dad showed up in about 20 minutes and we both cried. I called the police and they came in, checked it out, and did us a favor of calling the funeral home we asked. My dad said he was talking with him about 9 p.m. the night before and said he was sounding groggy, so he said goodnight and granddad must have rested and passed. He was a great guy. I was at the shooting range once, my first time actually, and an older gentleman shot himself in the stall closest to the door. Everyone had to walk right past his body to evacuate. Gruesome. It looks more disturbing in real life than the movies, and everything moved more slowly once I saw it. I was just getting comfortable with my weapon when they called a ceasefire, and I stood there wondering what had happened. Suddenly it was calls of everybody get out. Now. Go. Go. Pretty terrifying when you can't initially see what's on either side of you because of the lane barriers and you're wondering what the hell happened so bad we're evacuating, then just really sad to realize what happened. There was a kid there about 10 years old with his dad and brother. Hated. I found my dad's body after he killed himself last year. He was lying face down on his bed, so the blood had pooled down to his stomach and face, making him almost unrecognizable. His face was smooshed in, and his body was mottled blue, as he had killed himself during the night. It was an overdose. He mixed bottles of pills, oxycodone, Flexeril, Ativan, amitriptyline, and more, with alcohol and stopped breathing. I'll never forget time slowing down and feeling as if I wasn't there. I have severe anxiety and have dissociated before, but the dissociation that hits you when you experience trauma like this is truly something else. I knew he was dead, but my mind wasn't letting me acknowledge it. I was apparently screaming and I don't remember doing so. I tried to wake him up, I called to him and touched his shoulders and accidentally stepped in the puddle where he had peed himself. Feeling how stiff and cold his body was jarring. I was still in shock, but I remember it finally semi-clicking in my brain that he was dead the moment I touched him. I called emergency services, but don't remember the process of doing so. My dad had been suicidal for years, and I was used to taking care of him during his drug and alcohol binges. As such, I had been mentally preparing myself for this moment for years. He had tried to mutilate and shoot himself a year before, and I'd cleaned his blood then. I had even worked crime and trauma scene cleanup for a few years. I've seen terrible things. I've cleaned blood, brain matter, bone, and more, but finding my own dad dead shocked me, so much that I finally blacked out as he was wheeled away. I ended up having to clean everything up again, even after I had made my dad promise me he'd never do this to me again. Nothing will ever completely prepare you for losing a loved one or finding a body. No matter how much you may think you're desensitized or used to it, or think you may be okay, in the end nobody knows how they will react. To this day, my family's screams of anguish are what I remember the most from that day. The absolute worst part is the guilt and shame that rocks through you. You wonder if there was something you could have done to save them. You wonder if they'd still be alive, if only you had done X or Y over a year later, and I'm still suffering these thoughts. I would never wish this on anyone. One night I was out walking my dog along a country road where a ditch accompanied the road either side. As I was walking, my dog started going mad, trying to tug away from his lead to this ditch, so I wanted to see what it was. It ended up being a corpse, so I called the cops. They found out that a gang murder happened in the city about 40 miles away, and one of the members thought a small village would be a great place to put it. I worked at a retirement home for about a year, more specific at the dementia part of the house, and we had one man who every day was worried sick for his wife, who has been dead for 8 years. On his birthday both of his daughters showed up and talked and showed slot of pictures. He didn't remember his daughters, but he recognized his wife. Tears of joy, he watched pictures and then told stories. The morning after, when I went to wake him up, he was dead. He had a big smile on his face, and it was somehow very, very beautiful. I used to work in self-storage, and when I left, a buddy of mine took over the property I used to manage. We took a weekend off from our respective jobs to go to Vegas a few years ago. He lived on site in a company apartment. When we got back late in the evening, he walked around his property as is pretty typical. There was a car parked with someone in it. He knocked on the window and got no response. He called me and told me about it, and as I was close by, I told him I'd be right there. As I got close to the car, I could smell death. The car was locked and all the windows were fogged up inside. It was obvious that the person inside was dead. He called the police, and they responded with fire and medical. Yeah, the guy was dead. Reviewing the security cameras showed him come in and park there about 36 hours earlier. It was an overdose. I don't think it was ever determined to be accidental or suicide. Our town's baseball fields for Little League is in front of a small fence row of woods with an interstate on the other side. One hot day in July, like 90 all week, everyone at the games started smelling something awful. A couple of the dads and coaches went to go look, and there was a dead guy on the interstate side of the fence row. I guess a trucker broke down and was walking for help and died of heat stroke. I was playing baseball and never actually saw, but still a crazy day. I'm not sure if this counts, but I was walking to school, elementary, one day like 8 a.m. I'm between 9 to 11 past a 3-story building, and there was a body hung off the side. Turns out dude shot his wife then hung himself from his balcony. No one got there soon enough to deal with it before all the kids walked by and saw. Even by after school he was still there, but they covered him with a blanket. Fun stuff. I'll see if I can find the news report. When I was 8 I was walking with my dad and dogs deep in the woods, and the dog started barking at something at a distance. Bears and cougars were a possibility, so I was looking as hard as I could, and I saw a mannequin maybe 50 yards away. My dad said there's no way. One of the dogs kept barking at it from about half the distance between us and wouldn't come back. My dad went off the trail to retrieve the dog and shouted toward what I now could make out was a person. "Hey there, sorry about my dog, I don't know what." He stopped, rushed back with the dog and said we have to go home right now. At the time my 8-year-old logic assumed that it must be a person he doesn't like from work or from the neighborhood or something, and he just didn't want to chat. We walked home fast and in silence and he went back out right away. A few hours later he came home with 2 police officers asking me about what I saw. I remember explaining that I thought it was a mannequin, but I realized it was a really quiet person. What I didn't know how to explain was that there was an absolute stillness about him. The officers didn't tell me then, and my dad didn't tell me until I was 16, but what I saw was a man who had hung himself. My manager and I were talking once, bonding over our shared experiences living in South Africa. I was born in Durban, she in Johannesburg. She told me that when she was 12-13 a boy in the year below her went missing. Parents suspected he had been kidnapped and filled a missing person straight away. The school was a tremendous help, posters, assemblies, overall tougher security. It was the middle of the summer and the worry grew as the days went by. Almost 2 weeks after his disappearance, his father is checking the garden. A lot of gardens are more like large plots of land, unlike the cubes of grass I'm used to here in the UK. He gets to the wall at the other side of the garden and the smell hit him. My manager told me that they suspected the boy had been playing and climbed over the wall, tripped and hit his dead. I can't imagine what a body must look and smell like in the open for 2 weeks in scorching weather, but it's not something a parent should ever have to witness. I was part of a search team looking for a friend of a friend on our local game lands, 1,100 acres. We searched in teams for hours, and here he was lying dead in some bushes, not even 20 feet from the parking area. I wasn't part of the group who found him, but I saw him there before the police arrived and watched as they gathered evidence. He'd suffered for years from severe, treatment-resistant depression. I learned later he'd even been through electroconvulsive therapy after none of the medications available in 1989 worked and shot himself 2 days prior to our finding him. He was only 32. His poor mom led us there because he got some enjoyment from taking walks on the game lands. A truly sad, horrific and haunting experience. To this day I think about his mom, who I never met, and wonder how she is. The experience for me was surreal. I just couldn't believe I was looking at a dead human being outside in the woods. I'd been to open casket viewings and such, but to see a dead person with a grave wound out in the woods like that like a wild animal got me to a deeper understanding of myself as a mammal first. That was how it used to be for us in the distant past. We killed each other for food or power or shelter, and just left each other there, or tossed the dead aside without a thought. And that mammal, who'd kill for food, etc., is still in all of us. Not sure why seeing him like that took me down that particular path, but that's the effect it had, and still has on my thinking. I was at home sitting in my living room when I heard yelling and banging in the hallway of my building. I was pretty scared, but thought maybe I could help in some way, so I grabbed my phone and went to investigate. When I opened my door I saw a guy standing outside my neighbor's door. He turned out to be her ex, but they had a kid together. He had been calling her all day because the kid left a school backpack there, but my neighbor was not answering any of his calls. I think the janitor for the building let him inside the building and was maybe going to get the key to her apartment, but he didn't want to wait for that to happen. He was pretty upset and suspected something was terribly wrong. At that point he kicked down the door and we saw her lying on the couch with foaming blood around her mouth. He yelled at me to call 911 and I did, but I knew she most likely had been dead for a while. He was so upset he almost passed out and I felt so horrible and helpless. Another neighbor came out and gave him some water and I sat with him until the paramedics and police arrived. I had a hard time processing everything I saw that night and had flashbacks every time I passed that apartment. I never really talked to her much other than to say hi when I saw her in the lobby or hallway, but I think about her and that night a lot so many years later. I hope her kid is okay.